Once we were angels of death. Now we are corpses that cannot die, beneath a sky that weeps rot instead of rain. The Death Guard march, rusted titans dragging eternity behind them. Each step leaves decay blooming in their wake. They were the Emperor's endurance made flesh, until endurance itself became their curse. In their silence, only one truth remains: even strength can rot. Barbarus was not a world for men. It was a graveyard that refused to sleep. A sphere wrapped in poison mists, where sunlight perished before it touched the ground. The air itself gnawed at flesh, and the dead never stayed silent for long. Upon this world of endless decay, a child was found, pale as the fog, silent as the grave. They would call him Mortarion. He was raised by a creature that should not have been called father, one of the warlords who ruled Barbarus from their necrotic citadels above the clouds. The creature taught him survival through cruelty, love through pain. Mortarion learned quickly that weakness was death, and that mercy was a luxury no one could afford. In every breath of toxin, in every corpse that fed the soil, he learned endurance. When he grew tall and strong enough to defy his master, he descended to the poisonous valleys below, among the dying humans who still clung to life in the dark. They called him Savior, though his salvation was hard and cold. He taught them to fight, to suffer without surrender, to breathe the poison and call it air. And when he raised his army against the masters of Barbarus, he did so not for glory, but for vengeance. Then the Emperor came, brilliant and golden, immune to all poisons. To Mortarion, he was everything his adopted father had been, a tyrant that could not die. And when the Emperor saved the world that Mortarion believed he had earned the right to free with his own suffering, the seed of hatred took root. From that day forward, Mortarion would serve, but never love. Obey, but never trust. He would bow to the Emperor, but only until the next wind carried the scent of defiance. For beneath the armor, beneath the pallid flesh and gray eyes, a single truth endured. Mortarion would rather rule in rot than kneel in light. Loyalty in the beginning was his strength. Mortarion and his death guard marched beneath the banner of the Imperium with grim resolve, bearing their father's creed of endurance into the endless wars of the Great Crusade. They conquered the stars not through faith or zeal, but through sheer refusal to die. Poison, radiation, plague, all failed against them. They were the Emperor's wall of iron, his unbreakable sons. Yet beneath that iron, something began to rust. Mortarion despised the Emperor's sorcery, calling it hypocrisy. For what was the warp, if not another poison? The Primarch had sworn his legion to reason, to purity of purpose, but the galaxy offered neither. The Imperium's wars became slaughterhouses of pride. Mortarion's men watched worlds burn not for liberation, but for compliance. They began to whisper in their sealed helms, words heavy with exhaustion and doubt. The first cracks did not come with rage. They came with weariness, the kind that seeps into the soul after endless wars and endless lies. The Death Guard had endured every toxin, every horror, but the poison that finally reached them was despair. And in that despair, the whispers grew louder. Small offerings made to survive just a little longer. A prayer uttered not to the Emperor, but to something older, deeper, something that promised release from pain, from rot, from death itself. Mortarion refused to see it. He preached purity, even as corruption crept through the ranks like a slow fever. His captains, men like Typhon, spoke softly of new truths, of gods who rewarded endurance, who sanctified suffering. And when the warp began to stir, when the sea of souls reached out with festering hands, Mortarion's silence became permission. By the time he realized what had taken root among his sons, it was too late. The seeds had sprouted in the darkness of their hearts, nourished by grief and futility. They no longer fought for the Emperor, nor even for Mortarion. They fought for survival in a universe that no longer remembered mercy. They would endure, even if it meant damning themselves forever. The final betrayal began in silence. It was not the roar of rebellion that damned the Death Guard, but the slow, suffocating breath of inevitability. Their fleet, proud and indomitable, drifted through the void, its hulls pitted, its engines wheezing like dying beasts. Somewhere among the stars, the promise of victory had turned into a sentence of death. Typhon, first captain Herald of Rot, had guided them into the warp. He spoke of secret paths, of shortcuts through the storm. Mortarion, weary of the Emperor's yoke, allowed it. But the stars vanished behind walls of roiling infection. The void became a sea of disease. One by one, the crew began to cough, to bleed, to choke on their own bile. The Death Guard, once immune to all poisons, now found themselves prey to one they could not name. Mortarion raged. He tore open medici bays, demanded answers, cursed his captains, his men, his own weakness. But the sickness only deepened. The air turned thick. The walls pulsed with feverish life, and the decks slickened with filth. The fleet had become a grave, a mausoleum adrift in the warp, and then, amid the fever and madness, came the voice. It was not thunder or flame, it was laughter. Wet, gurgling, tender in its horror, it spoke not of power, but of comfort, of acceptance, of release from pain. Why resist what you have always been? The voice cooed. You endure. You suffer. You rot. You are already mine. They begged their father to save them, but Mortarion could not. His strength was endurance, not deliverance. He tried to breathe the poison as he once had on Barbarus, but the air itself was rebellion. For the first time, the Primarch, who had endured every agony, fell to his knees. Typhon whispered the name Nurgle, the Plague Father, the god of decay and renewal. He promised that the Death Guard would never die again, that their suffering would become purpose, that their endurance would be eternal. When Mortarion finally broke, it was not with a scream, but a sigh. A weary, resigned exhale that echoed across the ships like the breath of a dying god. The bargain was sealed. The sickness blossomed into rebirth. The Death Guard rose from their filth as living plagues. Their armor fused with rot. Their lungs filled with buzzing hymns of decay. Flesh sloughed, metal wept, and souls dissolved into pus and prayer. And through it all, the laughter persisted, fatherly, gentle, endless. Thus, the proud sons of Mortarion became something else entirely. Not angels of death, but apostles of decay. Their curse was not death, but life unending, a parody of endurance, twisted into worship. They had survived. And in the eyes of their new god, that was all that mattered. There are places in the warp where hope cannot breathe, where even the light of souls rots before it can burn. This is where the Death Guard awoke after their rebirth. They did not emerge upon a battlefield nor a throne world, but within a garden, though no mortal tongue should call it such. The sky hung low and wet, swollen with clouds that bled pus instead of rain. Trees of flesh twisted upward, their branches heavy with organs that dripped with honeyed rot. Beneath them crawled worms the size of men, whispering psalms to their master as they devoured the fallen. The air was alive, thick with spores, buzzing with flies whose wings hummed like the chanting of monks. And at the heart of it all stood the Plague Father himself, Nurgle. To gaze upon him was to see the paradox of the universe. Life birthed through decay, joy through corruption. His laughter shook the soil, his belly swelled with worlds, and from every tear in his flesh, new life squirmed forth in grotesque celebration. The Death Guard, still steaming with the filth of transformation, beheld their god with horror and awe. Mortarion fell to one knee, though pride still burned faintly in his hollow chest. "We are no one's slaves," he whispered. But his voice cracked beneath the weight of the air, a sweet, cloying presence that pressed into his lungs, promising peace where pride had brought only pain. Nurgle's laughter deepened. "Rolling like thunder through a swamp, you were never slaves, my child," he crooned. "You were merely lost. I have given you a home, a purpose. You suffer no longer, for now your suffering serves." The Primarch bowed his head. Not in worship, not yet, but in surrender. A silent acknowledgement that the plague had won. The Death Guard were blessed in turn. Each brother received a gift, a mark of devotion, a deformity of divine favor. One's lungs filled with spores that whispered prayers when he breathed. Another's skin hardened into a hive for sacred insects. They wept, they screamed, they laughed, and through their agony, they found belonging. Mortarion built his fortress among the bile rivers and bone trees, calling it the Manse of Dust. It was there he gathered his sons, not as warriors, but as priests of decay. No longer would they speak of purity or endurance, only of inevitability. For in rot, they found eternity. Yet sometimes, when the winds of corruption fall silent, Mortarion walks the edge of the garden alone. He gazes into the endless haze where the stars once were and feels something stir. A phantom ache, a memory of air untainted, of a sky that was blue, not sickly green. It does not last. The flies return, singing his litany, and the feeling fades like mist before dawn. The garden endures. The Death Guard endure, and in that eternal endurance lies their curse and their peace. Time has no meaning to the Death Guard. The galaxy rots, empires rise and fall, yet they march, always forward, never ending. Their crusade began not with glory, but with inevitability. For Nurgle's children do not conquer. They spread. Their war is not for dominion, but for contagion. A hymn of decay sung across the stars. When the warp finally spat them back into real space, the Imperium did not recognize them. Gone were the pale warriors of Barbarus, wrapped in the discipline of their Primarch. In their place came bloated giants, armor fused with flesh, bells tolling on their backs like funeral chimes. They did not shout or charge, they advanced in silence, patient as disease. Worlds fell not by blade or bomb, but by the gentle touch of corruption. Mortarion led from above, his sickle trailing through clouds of spores, his wings shedding rot across continents. Cities turned to graveyards before his gaze. Statues of the Emperor blackened and wept, their marble flesh dissolving into sludge. And still, the Death Guard marched, their boots sinking into the decay they themselves had birthed. To the Imperium, they were monsters, pestilence made manifest. To themselves, they were prophets. Each brother carried within him a seed of the Plague Father's gift, a contagion crafted from his own soul. To die in battle was to blossom, to fall and bloom into new life, spreading the garden's reach across another world. And yet, some still remembered. In the quiet between battles, as the flies slept and the air stilled, whispers crawled through the ranks. Memories of Barbarus, of fresh air that burned clean in their lungs. Some wept without knowing why. Others cursed the warmth that still flickered faintly within them. For immortality had not erased their humanity. It had preserved it, trapped it within rotting shells that could not forget. Mortarion heard their doubts but spoke nothing. His silence was its own sermon. He had long ago abandoned hope of redemption, yet in the deepest parts of his withered soul, he envied the dead. They were free. He was not. The crusade marched on. Worlds became pustules on the galaxy's skin. Even as imperial saints rose to cleanse their filth, the Death Guard endured, for endurance was their gospel. When their enemies burned them, they laughed. When they were shattered, they reformed. No victory could kill what had already accepted death. In one of their most infamous campaigns, the Siege of Galith Prime, the Death Guard besieged a hive world for 200 years. No charge, no grand assault, only rot creeping inch by inch. Entire generations lived and died under the slow suffocation of disease. When at last the gates fell, there were no defenders left, only corpses praying for an end that never came. From orbit, Mortarion watched the world dissolve into a swamp of filth and sighed. "So fragile," he murmured. "And yet they fought so hard to remain pure." He turned away, his scythe dragging through the air like the tolling of a bell. Behind him, his sons marched into the mire, singing hymns of joy through mouths filled with maggots. Thus the Death Guard continued their sacred work, not out of rage nor vengeance, but devotion. The galaxy would rot, as all things must, until only Nurgle's love remained. And through the endless ages of corruption and rebirth, the Death Guard would endure, tireless, unchanging. and forever cursed to bring peace through decay. There are moments, brief, fragile, and almost forgotten, when the Death Guard remember what it meant to be human. They come like ghosts, slipping through the rot, whispering in the cracks of armor and soul alike. The memories do not last, but they ache while they do. On a dead world without name, beneath skies thick with filth, a lone plague marine paused his march. Around him, his brothers trudged forward through the mire, their boots sinking into the liquefied remains of what had once been a city. Bells clanged softly, flies buzzed hymns of praise, yet he heard only silence. In that silence, he remembered sunlight. Not the green glow of disease, but true light, the kind that once warmed his skin when he was mortal. He remembered the wind over Barbarus's peaks, harsh and cold but clean. For a heartbeat, his rotting heart tried to beat faster. Then the memory dissolved into the stink of the present. Regret, for the Death Guard, is a sickness even Nurgle does not cure. Mortarion feels it most of all. From his throne in the manse of dust, he watches his sons spread plague across the stars, and sometimes, only sometimes, he wonders if he has damned them needlessly. He thinks of the Emperor, of that blinding figure of light he once hated for his lies of purity. Perhaps, Mortarion muses, it was not purity he despised, but his own inability to ever reach it. He does not voice this thought. The Plague Father's laughter still fills his world, sweet and suffocating, drowning out remorse. But in the quiet between breaths, Mortarion's wings droop, and his hand trembles over the haft of his scythe. It is not age or weakness. It is memory clawing through the mire. The Death Guard do not cry. Their tear ducts have long since decayed. Yet some kneel in the sludge when no one watches, pressing their rusted gauntlets into the filth as though searching for something buried deep. Something that once made them whole. But there is no redemption in the garden. Only acceptance, and so they rise again, their sorrow hidden beneath laughter, their regret buried beneath devotion. They tell themselves they are content, that the rot is their purpose, that Nurgle's love is enough. But in the hollow chambers of their minds, the question festers like an untreated wound. What did it cost to survive? The answer comes not in words, but in the eternal buzzing of flies, soft, constant, and mournful. It is the sound of a legion that endures without peace, of men who remember what it meant to be alive and wish, in the deepest shadows of their rotted hearts, that they could forget. There is no death for the Death Guard, only the slow erosion of meaning. In their endless march, time ceases to exist. Empires crumble, stars wither, galaxies turn to dust, yet they persist, unending, unchanged, unbroken. Their immortality is not a gift. It is the final sentence, for what is eternity to those who can no longer feel? Their bodies endure, their souls preserved like corpses in formaldehyde, incapable of decay yet incapable of life. The Plague Father's blessing has made them eternal witnesses to the rot of creation, custodians of a cosmos that will one day dissolve into silence. On the rim of a dying world, Mortarion stands alone. The wind moans across fields of bone, carrying with it the perfume of decay. His armor, once resplendent with purity, now hums softly with the life that festers within it, spores, maggots, and spirits that whisper lullabies to their weary master. He listens not with disgust, but with resignation. He once thought immortality would grant him power, vengeance, freedom from the Emperor's lies. Instead, it has bound him in stillness, for even in eternal life he cannot escape the truth. That the universe does not remember heroes nor monsters, only dust. Sometimes, in the void between wars, the Death Guard simply stop. Entire hosts drift in silence across the stars, their bells still, their laughter muted. Planets they once conquered fall quiet, overtaken by their own decay. In that hush, the fly's hum becomes a hymn to nothingness, a requiem for all that was ever pure. Mortarion gazes toward the light of distant Terra, a world he once swore to liberate and now can barely recall. The Emperor's golden radiance still pierces the warp, faint and unreachable. He wonders, not for the first time, if the light feels regret too. The Plague Father's laughter echoes faintly behind him, loving, endless, cruel in its tenderness. Mortarion does not turn. He closes his eyes, and for a moment that does not belong to gods or men, he imagines himself dying. Truly dying. No rebirth, no decay, just silence. But the moment passes, as all moments do. The flies resume their song, the bells toll softly, and the death guard march on, immortal, unchanging, forgotten by mercy. Their curse is not death. It is the silence that follows life.